Yes. Oh, there we go. I was talking about you, Sebastian. So yeah, happy Monday, everyone. Last Monday, I was lucky enough to have Daniel around to do this kind of nerding, and it was fun. But this week I wanted to start getting impressions because I know I learned that the GraphQL fanatics are hard at it, and they are making a lot of progress. And I would love to know the status of things, and I'm sure that many people want to know the status of things. What is there, and how can someone help?
Yeah, it would be great to hear more about that.
And I'm guessing that that Fubi is trying to find a quiet place. Nice.
There's no quiet space, sadly, but I'm finding it semi-quiet. Okay.
All right.
Right. So I'm in the gondola. There is quite some movement, as you already mentioned. We've added the query schema generation with a plugin system. So automatically now when you install the module, you get a full schema. We have a lot of support for Apollo now. We have support for batch queries. We have support for persisted queries. So you can store the query map with a extraction of the queries that you have in your source code in your React app in Drupal, so that you don't have to send the full GraphQL query as a string, but just the IDs that identify these requests. And that's also now what enables GET requests, so we can cache queries in CDNs or wherever. Yeah, caching, we have got caching support now based on cache contexts. Yeah.
Well, that's quite a lot. So the module, correct me if I'm wrong, the module is in dev stability. Is there a roadmap to get it to a beta? Is there
yes. We have got a few
that we can help
issues on GitHub. We've got a few open issues there still. And the issues that are currently open, except for two, are our beta blockers, or our release blockers for the first 3.0 version. There's two bigger issues that we will not be able to tackle as part of that. The first one is fragmental caching. So as I mentioned, we now have cache context support, but only for the full query. And what we want actually to do is we want to make it so that you can have parts of pieces of each of the queries in cache, so that we get more granular caching and don't have to resolve the full query if just one slight piece, one small piece of the query gets a different variable or something.
That is something. Sorry, before you move on, that is something that we discussed in the JSON API context, and we opted out because it was too complex. Just mentioning it. If you come up with a solution that is abstract enough to be reused, then that would be great. But the mean to put more strain on that.
Yeah, no, I mean there's a proof of concept and it's somewhat working, but obviously it's not ideal. And the main problem is that in big GraphQL queries, it would hit the cache table so often that the performance impact of the cached lookups is bigger than the benefit. So,
have you actually measured that, or?
Sorry?
Have you actually measured that and observed that it's actually more costly?
Yeah, the problem is that if you have an uncached query, it will still hit the database. So I was trying to implement something that is able or capable of loading the cache entries all at once, or in batches at least. and I'm still currently on that. So.
Oh, right, because you're hitting not just one or a few entities, you can be retrieving hundreds of entities at once from cache. And,
Yes, exactly. But currently I'm doing them at once, and that's
yes. So each requires a manual cache get instead of fetching a whole bunch. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so I'm trying currently now to batch them somehow, or put them together in larger chunks.
Is that something that the cache API supports? Loading in batch?
You can.
The problem is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the problem is I need to parse the query and get all of the information, which is tricky because in some cases also the parent value is relevant for resolving the cache entries. So yeah, I still don't have a solution for it, but I'll look at it further. But that's one of the things we will not be able to tackle, I guess. And there is another one. Yeah, config entities are probably going to come in the next release.
Yeah, that's a problem still in Drupal core as well, or at least you can read them nowadays and in JSON API as well, but actually modifying them, we don't have the necessary foundational APIs anyway, but okay. Reading is supported there. But yeah, I think the fragment caching, so caching of individual things that are nested in other responses and retrieving those from cache, that's something you can do later, I think, right? There's no reason that you need to block release on that, and the gains are definitely smaller than caching the overall response in response to a certain URL or request in the first place. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the one thing I'm wondering, how often do you actually have different kind of queries?
Good
That's the thing. Like, if you have a public API, if you have a public GraphQL API, of course, the queries might be vastly different. But in our products that we have built so far on this, we are using persisted queries anyway. So we lock down the public GraphQL API entirely, and we only enable queries that we have built at compile time. So there's like a build step in Jenkins that extracts the query strings from our React apps. Puts them, so like it statically analyzes the JavaScript that we have and creates a JSON file from these query strings, and then it uploads that file into Drupal, and then Drupal basically knows what queries the front-end needs. That's how basically how we version our API based on the code that we write. So when we commit our code, yeah.
Sorry, it seems that we're getting into implementation details, which is something that I love, but probably we want to give the chance for everyone to.
Okay, but then let's just wrap this up. So in reality, in a real product, you don't really have that many different queries. The only differences will be variables to these queries, like page 1, page 2 when you query listings, or IDs when you fetch things by ID or so.
I faced this problem with, I also implemented a custom solution for RESTful, and I found that the benefit was not as big as I expected. Maybe the use cases that I tested are not, a huge benchmark of what you can do. This fragmented caching, where they are very useful is when you have time-based queries, which change based on a filter on them with a timestamp, and you embed a bunch of stuff that are static. But anyway, I'm more than happy to compare notes on that if anyone is,
Yeah. I mean, one problem that we were trying to solve was for one of our clients, they had lots of editors adding new nodes to the system on every minute basically. And since we consume all of the cache tags that come from the schema, from the generated schema, and they also include the entity list cache tags, it basically invalidated the whole queries, whole caching for every time someone saved a node anywhere.
Okay.
So what you wanted, or what you did, probably something like min age, where you specify a minimum age for a certain cache entry so that it can be stale for maybe 1 minute. Maybe it's not updated instantly, but that avoids that continuous.
That's exactly what we're doing right now.
Yep. makes sense. We have an issue for that for Drupal core as well, for like the general use case, but we haven't actually implemented that yet. That would be an API addition.
And if Sebastian, you don't have anything else to add, is that like the full roadmap to beta?
Yeah, as I said, the full roadmap, I'm going to link this the issue queue here. The full roadmap is here, except for those 2 issues, which are also in this queue. We want to tackle all of these leftovers. Yeah, like better test coverage for certain things, and better view support. But that's it.
That is the one thing I wanted to ask, actually. I was looking at the GraphQL module, the Drupal module's code, and looking at the existing test coverage. And there is some, but it is not a whole lot.
Oh, actually, there is a whole lot now. We have test coverage in all of the submodules. We don't have test coverage for the core, but each submodule has basically full test coverage for its schema. We don't have test coverage, however, for like the core route enhancers and things like that. But we do have test coverage.
There's a module for every entity type, it looks like.
No, there's one module that generically does all content entities. That's GraphQL content.
Mm.
And then there's some modules for special field types, and one for views, for instance.
Okay.
And one for blogs, which does some extra stuff.
Yeah, so the only reason I'm asking is how confident are you about, so you've used this for a particular client with particular locked down queries, which means that you can prevent lots of security aspects problems simply because you know which queries exist and you control the queries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to be true necessarily for every site using GraphQL.
True.
So that's my main question. How confident are you about the access checking and validation and so on?
So access checking and validation is solid. We do in the validation, in the mutation module, we enable creation of entities based on the whole type data model. And we run validation on them and access checks. And every time something implements accessible interface, we also check that at query time, so on read time. So fields and content entities are covered. And then there's another issue. So that only covers access permissions. So preventing people from reading things that they are not allowed to see. There's another security problem, which is query complexity. So theoretically, you could hammer the server with vastly complicated queries, asking for thousands of nodes within thousands of nodes within thousands of nodes, which obviously would kind of easily enable DDoSing of the server. And for that, there's actually already an issue, and it's quite easy. There's a concept called query complexity analysis, and we can, using this thing, we can define a maximum complexity of the query, and there you can implement measures then. Also plugins.
Yeah, Drupal is like, I'm not less concerned about DDoSing personally. It's more the basic assumptions about entity and field access and so on. If that's covered, and there is some test coverage for that.
That's covered, yes.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Fantastic. One thing that I'm curious is we like to take vacation. We have lives, and maybe sometimes we get ill, and we would like to get reports on GraphQL so we can, maybe get people excited about helping. So is there anyone that I could ping and pester about joining this that is not you?
Yeah, Philip, my colleague, he has been helping me lately. He has joined the effort. He's not on the Drupal Slack though. I could ask him to join, but he just
IRC works as well.
Yeah, but he just became father for a second time, like 3 days ago or so. So he won't be here for a while.
Okay. Well, it's fine to have someone else to ping.
Also, Daniel.
Well, Daniel's everywhere. That's for sure. Cool. Thank you. I'm tempted to move on now, but I wanted to share some conversation that I had, and we were wondering why the uneven adoption of GraphQL and JSON API reported by the update module in Drupal.org, and I feel like it's about the stable release versus dev release. So I'm glad to go and help move forward to get first beta and then a stable release of GraphQL, because I think that when we land the two of those, then Drupal has no rival in the decoupled land. So speaking of Drupal, and that's a very lame segue into Drupal core stuff. Maybe Wim, you can give an update on what's going on and how we can help.
So in Drupal core land, we have not been landing a whole lot. What we have been landing is test coverage for example, access checking for various config entities. So that's one of the big things that also impacts JSON API and GraphQL. Many config entities exist and use the entity system, but they only are ever touched, used. So that means read or interpreted by other code or created by some other code in the form of forms. So the thing is that access checking for config entities has been not as important, but as soon as you want to expose it via JSON API, Core REST, or GraphQL, of course, it does become important. So we're working on adding access control handlers and permissions and making those things clearly defined for all config entity types in Drupal core. And today, 3 more of those landed. So that means at this point that there's only 12 left in total. I think 1 or 2 content entities and all the rest are config entities. So that is moving forward at a nice pace. But then actually the majority of the time is going to several major REST-related issues. So related to foundational things such as caching, but also relating to which fields are read-only and should be validated and so on versus not. And then there's edge cases there that need to be handled. And unfortunately, all of those things also affect JSON API and also affect GraphQL. But the test coverage for both JSON API and GraphQL is not quite at the same level yet as Core REST, which is fine. It took a lot of time to get to this point. But that means that we are in Core REST finding those issues ahead of you guys, but it also means that we're solving it ahead of you guys. So we're solving it in Core so that JSON API and GraphQL benefit from things becoming more predictable, stable, and work in a non-ambiguous way, as in work in the one way that you would expect and not with lots of edge cases. And it requires working quite a bit with the entity API, field API, and type data API. So we're working on solving many of those gnarly issues, and those take quite a lot of time. So we're working with subsystem maintainers and core committers to evaluate what the next steps are. And that is, unfortunately, a bit of a slow process, also for good reason, because if we do it wrong, we break lots of sites. So not a lot to report, but some useful progress there. There is one thing that will impact both, well, all 3, so JSON API, Core REST, and GraphQL, which is that path aliases are now actually exposed when you normalize them. So you can actually, if you have, for example, an article node, and you can finally access path aliases in Drupal 8.4. So those kinds of issues are also in progress. I think that's about it for Core REST.
I almost feel bad for the path field because he was left alone for so long, but it's now there. That's great, and I have to tell you, when you find these bugs and you fix them, I assume that if you know that the fix is not going to just happen magically for JSON API, that you will open a JSON API follow-up.
Yeah, of course.
That's awesome. So yeah, the configuration validation thing is, the configuration entity access thing is unfortunate, but I mean, it's getting fixed.
And actually, Daniel has been working quite a bit, not in the past week or so, on config entity validation capability, so that you can actually do modifications of config entities via REST. And then also once JSON API and GraphQL do make the necessary changes, because if I remember correctly, there are some changes necessary in that case. But in any case, it is becoming possible. So we're moving to the point where that is actually becoming possible. It will take some more time, probably, though.
That's great. My argument always was, it's okay if validation is not quite there yet, because you can only edit the things that you have permissions for, but turns out there were no permissions. So
yeah, for quite a few things, but it is also quite like, if you get a small thing wrong in certain config entities, it could have a big ripple effect on the actual site.
Absolutely, yes.
There is that risk, but yeah, you can choose to take that risk. Yeah, if you add the necessary hacks today, you could choose to take the necessary risk.
So where is a place that someone could go lend a hand? Is there anything that you have in mind?
Yes, actually. So I'll post 2 issue links in this Google Hangouts. One for config entity CRUD support, so being able to modify config entities. That is this issue. So that's 2300677. And then the other one, give me a minute to find it.
That's okay. I love that you read the numbers for people that are watching this offline, which I think it's some people. So thank you. So I want to speak a little bit about the Contenta CMS initiative, or the API first distribution. Official API first channel, but it's kind of turning into that. So feel free to join and talk anything there. We have, thanks to Christina, we have a logo, some branding, and we've been putting that in place. And most importantly of everything, I think that Joao joined, and Matt, they are both working on an example application. So we have this concept of the standard application, which mirrors the out-of-the-box experience initiative. And it's a magazine, it's a recipes magazine, and it's, the idea is to have this app with a decoupled Drupal backend in different technologies. So there is Elm, which Daniel has been working on. There is Angular, there is React, and I know that someone is looking into starting something in Ember and Ionic. So I'm just, paralyzed by the, the adoption of this idea, and I think that this is gonna help a lot, when people evaluate Drupal as a decoupled backend solution. So very excited about that, and try to coordinate and not let things fall through the cracks in there. And there is a lot to do, because we want to ship the installation profile with a decent amount of documentation that you may need when you go decoupled, with links to, like, it's not documentation inside of the installation profile, but it's a thin content type that will aggregate links to the relevant documentation, so people can contribute. Hey, I read a blog post that is interesting. I'm gonna open a PR to create default content for that. So a lot going on at the moment, and I'm pretty excited about it and passionate. Daniel, do you feel that there is anything worth mentioning that I'm missing?
That's a good question. We are currently looking into, actually, I think what would be really cool is to get more people into implementing front ends. I mean, there are even more frameworks out there. There's like Vue.js and all kind of alternatives. Or I think, for example, Sally, who worked on the React front end, could probably need some help, I assume. So yeah, finding more people also on the existing front ends.
Yeah. I realized I called out some people, and it was a matter of a praise, just like I said your name and Salis and Joao and Matt, and everyone that is involved. That doesn't mean that the effort is gonna follow through till the end, because this is volunteer work. So if you think this is a great idea and you want to see this happen, just go in hand if you can, and you have the skill set. But there are lots of tasks. For instance, we will need content to serve these guys. So their front ends, they have content to consume, and that means importing recipes, but not only recipes, but also different categories, and kind of getting things out there. And we can use help redacting the help pages on how these things work and what we are trying to achieve with this, because as someone that is speaks the language natively, will probably communicate better. So yeah, if you want to get involved, please do, and join the discussions in the Slack channel. Before we run out of time, well, it's just 1 minute, Ted. Do you have any? Sorry, we took a lot of time. Do you have anything super quick to share?
Well, Matt just left, Matt Davis, but he wanted to plug Drupal Dev Days. So maybe if there's links to that, to put that in, if there's links that go along with this, maybe put this page in there, just a placeholder for now. I don't really know much more besides that. I'm trying to get Schemata able to work with 8.3 and 8.4, to work with OpenAPI. And then at that point, I guess at some point, I really need people who know JSON API to look at the generated docs that OpenAPI is making, or really the OpenAPI spec file. I know it's not right now, but I haven't looked to see what the other different routes are, is like I don't know, the ones that aren't just the straight CRUD stuff, the one that bring in the relations. So I need to figure out ways to document that. So at some point I'll be asking for help for that. But if anybody wants to look at it now and give me feedback, that'd be good.
I think as an MVP, those routes can be left alone. If we were able to have OpenAPI documentation for a particular entity type, either content or config, and I know that config is not quite there yet, that would be fantastic. And that's pretty much what we're doing with Doxon, which is probably going to go away as soon as OpenAPI is there. So
is Doxon actually working now with the Schemata version that's out there? How are you guys heard? It's being patched, Schemata.
It kind of depends on the Drupal version, right?
Yeah, we can talk about that afterwards.
Yeah. But yeah, it's working. If you install content with the latest Drupal version using the installer, you get a functioning Doxon and Schemata installation working.
Okay.
I didn't click every entity type, but yeah, a bunch of them, and they work.
Okay.
Well, I feel I rushed through the whole thing, but we're done. Unless anyone has anything that they want to do after talk about, I'm happy to stay a couple more minutes.
I would have loved to chat with Sally about the React frontend she's building, but she just left.
Yeah, I know that she has somewhere else to be, 30 sharp.
was
But
just like,
I will
yeah.
pass the message. Oh, I guess that she got the message already. Anyways, goodbye everyone, and thank you for joining.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.